Hey there. Amy and I wanted to take the last podcast episode and just talk a little bit about what we've learned this year from our guests and the topics that we've discussed, the conversations that we've had, and a little bit about what we've learned from podcasting since we started this journey in 2016, was it? 2017?
Amazing. People ask us all the time, Holland, about the story behind the Afterword. And I didn't even think about that being something that we should share sometime, but maybe we'll leave that for another episode.
So welcome to the year in review for the Afterword podcast.
Yeah. So this has been a year that has had me reflecting as I think back over the year, because Holland, we started the year with humor and we have ended our year with moral outrage. The bookends are just so opposite, but to me almost encapsulate the experience of our world in 2020. Because, we started 2020, it was so promising and lots of analogies of this being the year for clarity and vision and purpose. And then COVID-19 hit and we have new words like pivot, the social distance, and quarantine. And so I am very grateful that the podcast community continues to rally, offering encouragement and support and access to conversations around the world through this medium of technology.
Right. And I remember we started the second episode, I think, this year was the one on Stories from the Campaign Trail podcast, Talking Politics with Deb Sofield and Phyllis Henderson. And I remember them sharing about how they used their elected positions to help other people. And I remember Deb saying, use the word hope, tell stories of hope, give people hope. And if there's ever been a year when we needed to hear stories of hope in the political arena and every other arena, 2020 has been it. But as I was thinking back over the episodes that we've recorded and the conversations that we've had on this podcast, we have heard a lot of hopeful stories. Think about James Carberry and Mary Catherine Kuntz. They gave us hopeful stories about starting your own business from scratch. I think Marissa DuPasquale and Tom Davis talking about virtual education. That was, I thought, a hope-giving episode when we think about the different ways people are learning now.
Oh, I completely agree, Holland. And I was also thinking of some of our metaphors from our previous year. And these have been avenues of encouragement and helped us learn a little bit more about the trends that we were talking about. For example, Scott Ospelmeyer used the one about Sisyphus, the king of Corinth, that Zeus punished, and he had to eternally push the rock up the hill to describe the impact of anti-Semitism. And while that doesn't necessarily seem hopeful, it does support the idea of an effort and a movement. And I was appreciative of that. And then Rachel Hodges used the idea of mushrooms and how they're all connected underground in the dark, and that connectivity of women empowering other women. And I know, Holland, neither one of you like to eat mushrooms, but it was a good metaphor. Mm-hmm. And then the keys on the ring, showing the idea of home and human rights that Stephen Bauman shared, that was very hopeful to me because, as he's talking about human rights and ethical storytelling, what people have that these keys belong to, while they still may be in a place of devastation and they're leaving their country because of climate situation or war, whatever it may be, it still produced a little bit of hope. And then one of the ones to me that was very powerful was the drop of water being like our vote and how many drops become a powerful voice, according to Sharnice Mangle.
Now, coming up with a metaphor is a lot harder than it looks. We've been asking it since the first episode. We got the idea for that question from the celebrity journalist Malcolm Gladwell. He said it was one of his favorite questions for understanding what his interviewees are really trying to communicate. And of course, many times the metaphors as we talk about them turn out to be similes, or they turn out to be stories, or they turn out to be some imperfect representation. But I think asking that question and in a way the sort of stumped silence we sometimes get demonstrates just how complicated and complex the topics we talk about really are. We're always learning something new.
I completely agree, Holland. I mean, and it is kind of fun in some ways when somebody tells us this is the hardest question you're asking us. But then they come up with these brilliant metaphors,
right?
Leave us speechless. And we're just kind of going, yeah, it's a hard question. But when you reframe whatever trend that we're talking about into this metaphor, you put it in such a succinct way that leaves us with almost an exclamation point at the end of our podcast. And I really appreciate them suffering through it with us.
Right.
Oh, goodness. We've had a year of loss too, Holland. I mean, COVID has taken a lot of people, and then other people have passed away that didn't have COVID. And one of the ones I'm thinking of who also loved to learn and loved words was Alex Trebek. And on the Afterword podcast, or TAP, we love new words. We love to talk about words. We love to think about words. And so what about we review some words, Jeopardy style? What do you think, Colin?
Okay, let's give it a shot. Are you going to be Alex Trebek, or are you going to be the contestant?
I don't know. I'm a little bit nervous to take on that mantle, but I'm also nervous about answering correctly. So I don't know. Should we flip for it or what?
Well, you know what? I could be Alex for the first few, and then you can be him for the last few. How's that?
Okay, that sounds great.
All right. So here's one. This word means a way humans relate to and laugh at things that are different or out of balance.
Okay, so you gave me a little clue with the word laugh, and that makes me think back to James Carey and Harrison Brookie. And I think it was Harrison Brookie that talked about this. So what is asymmetrical?
I wondered where that word came from. It was humor. Huh.
Yeah, because he said that we laugh at things that are not congruent, that, when things don't make sense, we laugh at them. It's true.
That's right. All right. What about this one? Optimistic attitude about the environment and the impact of sustainable change.
Okay. This one was a hopeful one for me. What is regenerative? I can't even say it. What is regenerative? Regenerative.
I think it's regenerative, isn't it? Because it's generate again.
I can't even say the word. So I'm not going to be very good at this. But that episode with Joel Tichy and John Younger, I will never forget Joel's story about catching the fish in the Alaska area in the water and opening it up, and there was a can inside that fish's belly. And how our earth will regenerate itself. And that was a piece of hope. And we saw that during COVID. I mean,
we did.
Posting pictures about seeing Mount Everest and Kilimanjaro without any smog, and hadn't happened in decades.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a good word for 2020.
What about this one? Using play to motivate learning or productivity.
Play and productivity. What is gamification?
Did that word come from Marissa and Tom on virtual learning, or did that come from the three guests we had who talked about board games?
I think it came from a lot of our episodes, because we did have the one about video games with John Stotts and Casey Team.
That's right.
But then we also had the wonderful guests that the creator of Pictionary, Rob Angel.
Right.
Nick Cravata, and then also with Marissa and Tom with education. So it seems like gamification comes in a lot.
I think it does. I think it's something companies are using, schools are using, maybe even families are using now with so much virtual education happening that, people are more willing to do stuff if it's fun and they're rewarded for it, right?
Right. Why not?
All right. This word means those opposed to technology.
Okay. And I mispronounced this the first time on our episode. And this was with John Wyatt and Scott Hawley, which was probably one of my favorites, just because these two were just amazingly brilliant guests. But I believe it is, what is Luddite?
I have never heard the word pronounced, or I hadn't heard the word pronounced until we had that conversation with them. And I had just read it. So when they started pronouncing it, I was like, oh, okay.
So I want to say Luddite because it has the E on the end, but I guess the "ite" part, with a double D, it's Luddite or Luddite. Yes. Okay.
Right. I guess the E helps the I be long.
There we go. Yes.
Okay. That was one of my favorite episodes as well, because I just never, I think so much of what I thought I knew about artificial intelligence was informed by TV or movies, or books, and it wasn't informed by reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, last word. Here's something. Repurposing objects. We talked about this twice. Repurposing objects. Mary Catherine Kuntz mentioned it, making her belts for Uniquely MC, and then Jerry Blassingame mentioned it because they repurposed the wood from old barns at Soteria into tables and other things. So repurposing.
Okay. Repurposing. Okay, so what is upcycle?
That's the one. Upcycle.
Yeah. And amazing. Just the fact that, again, and that just goes back to a little bit of our environment issue, or the episode where we're talking about repurposing things and, using things wisely. I just really appreciated what both Mary Catherine and Soteria at Work does. They have some gorgeous, gorgeous things. All right. You ready to flip and be the guest?
I'll do it.
Okay. No toilet paper and a supply chain that reacts to demand.
Well, this was on our episode on supply chains, which I don't think that was one we came up with, or an idea we came up with too early on. But it turned out to be the big story of the year, because we were saying, every story we've ever read or every movie we've ever watched about a pandemic, people are scared of getting the virus.
Right.
And of course people are, and for good reason, but originally the real problem was those broken supply chains, and people couldn't get, of all things, toilet paper. So, but the word you're looking for is bullwhip effect. You have to
answer it in a question.
What is the bullwhip effect?
Very good. Well done. Yeah. Dr. Mark Ferguson and Scott Luton, they were amazing and, just so much fun. Who thought that supply chain conversations would be so timely and yet also so fun? Because it really was a lot of fun.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Okay. So I'm just going to give you one word. Schema.
This word was one we talked about on code switching with Miles Durkee and Araceli LaRoche. It had to do with mental shortcuts used in code switching. That was an episode I never would have thought about doing until you suggested it. And I never even realized that's what people were doing. When they were code switching, I didn't realize there was a name for it or that it had been studied like that. And that was a really interesting episode to me.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of my students did her senior capstone project on being herself an ELL code switcher and what that took. And that whole idea of developing a schema so that you can have a shortcut, because what they were talking about with that cognitive load, it's exhausting. Yeah. Okay. These are political races and issues that personally and intimately are connected to our communities.
These are the down ballot races, or what are the down ballot races?
Very good.
And I was reading an article about that this morning because, yes, I was, because this came up, this just popped up on my phone from, some news source, but it was saying that there were a lot of areas around the country where the top of the ticket voters went for Joe Biden, and then the down ballot races went to Republican candidates. And there was an analysis of, in these select kind of purple areas, people were splitting their ticket and voting Democrat at the top of the ticket and Republican on the down ballot races. and what that would do for 2 years from now, 4 years from now, and even longer, because whoever holds those down ballot offices now, those are the people who are going to be running for higher offices 4 years, 8 years, 12 years down the road.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And just, I really appreciated that episode with Sharnice Mangle and Lawson Wetley, and just even thinking as an educated voter and that power of the vote and how those votes count and those down ballots being so important. Yeah. Well, interesting that you already read about it already today.
I did.
All right. How about this one? Cycles of punishment that create barriers which make re-entry difficult.
This is when we talked with Jerry Blassingame and Kate Weaver Patterson. And I hadn't heard this term used before, but I knew what they were talking about. It's when somebody has already served a sentence, maybe in prison, and they've already gone through reentry, but they still they're on a list, right? They still have to check a box when they're applying for employment. There's still a record that follows them around and makes life difficult for them. And what are collateral consequences?
Excellent. Yeah, that was a tough one to hear about that just cycle of punishment. And, we think about collateral damage in a war or some type of intelligence situation. And so these collateral consequences, and they were even with the families and how that goes down through generations. That was a tough one. But also, again, talk about hope. Soteria's re-incarceration rates are what, 4%?
Very low.
That's amazing. So again, so much hope. And that's, again, just kudos to Deb Sofield and that reminder. She kind of gave us our calling this year,
She did.
Yeah. Focus on the hope. All right, here's our last one. The way that social media and businesses measure human activity and return on investment.
It's what is analytics, but I don't remember which episode we talked about analytics on. Was it that with James and Mary Catherine?
We talked about it there, but we talked about it through several of our episodes, and the most recent with Dylan Smith and Rob Henderson, Peel of Negative Stories and Social and Moral Outrage.
I remember that. Dylan was saying that you lead with a negative headline and then you follow it with a positive story. And the negative headline gets people to click, but then the positive story is uplifting and encouraging rather than continuing to drive people down that outraged emotional highway.
Exactly. And talking about wanting to change the algorithms and how those analytics are measured so that maybe we weren't pursuing the negative as much, which was very interesting. So yeah, so well done. You win 1,000,000 points, even though the points don't.
Right.
Talk about some of these top episodes, Holland.
Well, the most downloaded episode for the year was Stories from the Campaign Trail with former state senator Phyllis Henderson, and campaign coach, and our Greenville Water Commissioner, Deb Sofield. And we knew that was going to be a fun episode and a good episode because I hadn't met Phyllis before, but I knew Deb. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed their insight into how people develop the stories they're going to tell on the campaign trail, how people dress, how they present themselves on stage. That makes a difference for people when they're soliciting votes. And of course, we knew this was going to be an election year, and we had no idea how it was going to turn out or that it was going to be so contentious and so close in some of the highest profile races. But it opened up a lot for us to talk about. And I guess it was nice to hear from people who had a positive spin on what they were doing, or they weren't just talking about winning. They were talking about winning for a reason, right? I want to help.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, that was very refreshing. Then the next one was
supply chains. Surprisingly, supply chains had only 5 fewer downloads than campaign trail stories. And who would have thought about this? But I guess, and I'm just guessing, I know Scott did a lot to promote the episode, but people got interested in supply chains, maybe many of us for the first time when you went to the grocery store, and we were out of the most random things, of course, toilet paper, but also my grocery store went months without frozen blueberries because for some reason the supply chains that carried blueberries had broken down this year. something COVID related. I know there were a lot of other things that you would just go by and you'd see this whole section of the shelf wiped out.
Right. And not just in the grocery stores. I mean, you think about how this has impacted health equipment and things like that. I mean, I don't think, and I love what they were talking about, their metaphors, that we're all supply chain managers. I appreciate that. I think this resonated with people, and it was a very popular episode. Very timely.
Our third most popular episode was the one we did on anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And it was interesting, but I was a little surprised that it got that number of downloads, especially for being something that's not really an uplifting topic, something people want to think about.
Yeah, but we need to, because unfortunately, as some of the things that Melinda and Scott brought out, this isn't an issue that has gone away. It's such a current issue right now, even in our own country, unfortunately. So I think it was very important to talk about that. And, we talked about other issues like mental health, which was, again, so every single one of these episodes was powerful, but those happen to be the top three. And, I even think about grandparents raising grandchildren episode and the power of the spoken word. I mean, just that encouragement of trying to bring trends to the light, and we weren't ever quite sure how those downloads would go, but it was very interesting that those were the top three. Yeah. Holland, one of the things that you and I both said when we were beginning this podcast journey is we had a couple of markers for success, and maybe we did have the bar a little low, but one of the markers, and we didn't have it happen the first year, since this is our second year.
Right.
One of the markers that did happen this year that we were both asked to be on someone else's podcast. So that was kind of exciting. I was on the Mark Jeffries show and the Essex Business podcast, and you were on a couple yourself.
Well, your two were both in the UK.
Right.
And how did you even find the Essex Business podcast?
I think he put a query out, I think we were all at the beginning of COVID lockdown, and we're in this podcasting community, which is so supportive and so encouraging. And we were just trying to support one another.
And you were talking about virtual learning, right?
We were, and, just being hopeful in this season right now.
Right. And then I was on 3 podcasts because of the book, Adventures in Fatherhood, that came out about a month before Father's Day this year. That was the 60-day devotional I wrote with Carlton Hughes.
Actually, you're on 4 if you count ours.
You count ours, yes. Because Judy Jankowski came and co-hosted with you, and Carlton and I were the guests. But I was on Letters from Home with Meg Gleasoner, and Exercise Your Faith podcast, Kingdom Over Coffee. And then I was on one called The Right Hour, talking about business writing. It was really fun to be in the other. Well, I say fun. I don't know. I'd rather ask the questions than be asked.
Yeah. Well, that is very true. It is a bit. Although I know I learned when we were on the. We actually got to be part of the Local Legends Comedy Hour this year.
Yes, we did.
And I remember we had to come up with some things that would be fuel for their improv. And that was one of mine, is learning how to ask good questions. And so, that became a hilarious improv bit.
At our expense, yes.
At our expense, but it was good. But I think, being on the other end of receiving the questions and then asking the questions, I know I have to think about that, because they're both kind of hard at times. Talk about next year, Holland. What are we looking at for next year?
Well, we've got several great topics coming up. I know we spent a lot of time on this earlier, and we came up with some topics, and then we've discarded a bunch, and then we came up with some more. But I know we're going to be talking about sports, and we've done this once before with Tom LeGrand and Brendan Scott, the first year that we podcasted. But this time we're talking about not just how we tell the stories of sports, but how sports can influence a neighborhood or a nation.
Yeah, and that's going to be so much fun.
That's going to be a great episode. And we're talking about how cities flourish. story of coffee.
Can't wait.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to be talking about health too. We're going to do one on brains.
Mm-hmm.
Brain
Yeah.
health.
And some things about the outdoors and why we need to maybe in 2021, because we are not quite out of COVID yet. We may be needing to think about some outdoor education and the lifelong benefits of some of these things that we are learning in COVID. You know, I coined my new term, coronatudes, these gratitudes from Corona. What have we learned in 2020 that we can now take into 2021 and beyond? And so that's kind of what we're hoping to do for this coming year. But we want to thank all of our listeners and subscribers. This has just been such a encouragement, a way to connect. We've heard so many good things from our listeners and our subscribers about things you like, things maybe that you want to hear more of. We would love your feedback and appreciate every single one of you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
See you in just a few weeks when we start season 3.
Absolutely. And as always, we will finish with our tagline, you are welcome at our table.